The wind carried the stench of sweat, horses, and stale whiskey through the alley behind Callahan's saloon. Late afternoon sun spilled like fire over the sagging rooftops, painting the dirt-packed street in long, broken shadows. A crowd had gathered, miners, cowhands, fur traders, and drifters, all orbiting a crude wooden platform hastily built for one purpose, human sale. A girl stood on that platform. She wore no shoes. Her hands were bound at the wrists with coarse rope. And over her head, a burlap sack, dirted, fraying, hiding everything that might remind someone she was human. The auctioneer, sweat slicking his brow, slapped the post behind her. No name, no claim, no history. She works. That's all you need know. She eats little, don't talk much. Strong enough for laundry, cookin', or keepin' warm come cold nights. A few chuckled low. Others spit tobacco near the base of the stage. $3 to start. A beat of silence. Then a bid. $3.50. $4. The girl didn't flinch. Didn't twitch. She could have been a corpse standing for the gallows. A sack over her head was better than eyes meeting the filth below. $4.50. A pause. From the far end of the crowd, a figure stepped forward. Tall. Broad-shouldered. His long duster flapped behind him as a gust blew in from the west. The brim of his hat shadowed his face, but his eyes, steel gray, cold as Wyoming frost, cut through the crowd. The murmurs died as he passed. He reached the edge of the platform, looked up at the sack-covered girl, then at the auctioneer. "$6, he said. His voice was gravel. Measured. The auctioneer blinked. $6? Hell, mister, you're... The man held up the coins. Silver and heavy. Sold. The crowd broke apart like dry brush in wind. Some sneered. Others muttered curses, but no one challenged him. He was Abram McAllister. Once a captain in the Union Army. Now a rancher with no kin, no kindness, and no patience for fools. Abram stepped onto the platform, gently took the girl by the elbow. She didn't move. Her breath came shallow through the sack. He reached up, slowly, and untied the twine at the neck. The burlap came loose. He pulled it off. And he fell. To his knees. The crowd had started to drift away, but those still within earshot turned back, confused. The girl blinked against the light. Her face was gaunt but smooth, green eyes wide with confusion. Her lips were chapped. Her cheek bore an old scar, a thin white arc, barely visible. Her black hair spilled down in a tangled curtain. She stared at the man kneeling before her, not understanding why his face had gone pale, why his shoulders trembled. Abram didn't speak. Couldn't. He only stared. Because he knew those eyes. Not just familiar. Blood. She was Annabeth. His niece. 15 years had passed since the raid on his sister's farm. The day Confederate deserters torched the house and took the girl. Abram had found only ashes and a broken doll. They'd searched the riverbanks for weeks, assuming she'd drowned or been buried in the woods. But she hadn't. Somehow, she'd lived. He rose, breath ragged. The girl flinched as he stepped toward her, but he only wrapped his coat around her shoulders and guided her down the platform steps. She didn't resist, but neither did she walk willingly. She followed like an animal unfamiliar with trust. The sheriff stood by the saloon's porch, watching. He stepped off and tipped his hat. "She's trouble, McAllister. Been through 3 owners this month. Last one found her stealin' bread and bid-in hands. You sure you want to take on that kind of freight?" Abram said nothing. "You take her, you feed her. She breaks law, it's on you." Still silence. He helped her into his wagon, gave her a tin flask of water, and clicked the reins. They rode out of town under a dying sun, dust rising behind them like ghosts trailing a coffin. She didn't speak the entire ride. Night fell. The sky bled purple, then black. Stars blinked above the plains. In the silence, only the creak of the wagon and the rhythmic clop of hooves broke the stillness. Abram glanced at her once. She had curled into herself, arms tight across her ribs, face turned to the boards. Even asleep, her body was braced like it expected a blow. They reached the ranch just past midnight. Nestled against the foothills, the McAllister homestead sprawled in quiet isolation. A main house of stone and pine, a sprawling barn, and pastures that touched the tree line. No lights. No neighbors. Just wind and land and memory. He carried her from the wagon. She woke, flailing briefly. He hushed her, held her still until her breathing slowed. Then he led her into the barn, not the house, and up the ladder to the loft. A pile of fresh hay, a wool blanket, and a bucket of clean water waited. He left without a word. In the morning, she was gone. Not far. He found her by the creek, crouched in the reeds, gnawing on raw turnips from the field. She bolted when she saw him. He didn't chase her. Instead, he returned that evening and left bread, water, and a lantern in the loft. She came back after dark. The days passed. She slept in the loft. He kept to the house. They spoke no words. Only gestures. A nod meant eat. A raised palm meant stop. She watched him from the barn while he worked the fields, mended fences, broke the frost off the troughs. Watched how he moved slow, deliberate. Like a man carrying something heavy even when his hands were empty. One afternoon, she approached while he was chopping wood. She stood a few yards away, arms crossed, jaw set. He paused. She pointed to herself. Then mouthed, "Why me?" He stared at her. Then turned back to the wood. That night, she carved those same words into the beam above her haystack. "Why me?" He stared at it the next morning. Ran his fingers along the grooves. Didn't sand them down. Just nodded, once. The next week, a storm rolled in off the mountains. Snow by October wasn't rare this far north, but this one was early, harsh, relentless. Wind howled. Trees cracked under pressure. The barn roof groaned. Then it collapsed. She screamed from inside. Abram ran. Found her under the rafters, pinned by a falling beam. He lifted it, one good leg braced against the wreckage, and pulled her free. But the roof came again, and this time it took his leg. She dragged him out with strength she didn't know she had. His blood left a trail across the snow. She lit the fireplace herself. Hauled him onto the couch. Heated water, wrapped his wound. Sat beside him all night, eyes wide, lips trembling, but steady. He came to the next morning, warmth on his skin, bread on his tongue, and a blanket tucked up to his chin. She sat across from him. Watching. When he met her eyes, she spoke for the first time. "Thank you." His voice cracked. "Don't thank me." "Why not?" He looked at her then, really looked. And said the name that hadn't passed his lips in 15 years. Annabeth. She stared. Then blinked. But didn't speak again. Outside, the wind began to settle. The snow fell softer now. Inside, something else had started to thaw. The pain in Abram's leg was constant now, a dull, punishing throb that reminded him with every breath he was no longer the man who could chase a horse for 3 miles or fell an ox with a single bullet. Infection had crept in after the collapse, despite her care. She boiled cloth, soaked dressings in whiskey, changed them twice a day with the precision of a battlefield nurse. He never asked how she knew such things. She didn't offer. Most days, she spoke only when needed. A few words here, a nod there. But her silence wasn't the scared kind anymore, it was the guarded silence of someone rebuilding something they'd once lost faith in. And Abram, for all his years on the plains, knew better than to force speech from a wounded creature. Instead, they built around the quiet. She cooked. Not well, but better with each try. She mended his shirt with clumsy but earnest stitches. She began sweeping the floors, chopping vegetables, feeding the horse without being asked. Every small task was done like a sacred act. As though purpose was the only currency she trusted. By the 3rd week, she no longer flinched when he entered a room. Still, the storm hadn't passed. It had only moved inward. One night, a scream shattered the stillness. Abram jolted awake, pain flaring down his leg. He hobbled to the barn, her new room, since repairs had been made, and found her curled in a corner, blanket clutched to her chest, gasping like she'd been running miles. He crouched low, careful not to startle her. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on something far away, something she could still see even if he couldn't. "They kept me in the dark," she whispered. "For so long? I forgot how to dream." His breath caught. "I used to scream, and no one came. Just rats and chains." A pause. "They named me number 3. Said names were for girls who mattered." He reached out, just slightly, but she shook her head. "Don't." So he didn't. He stayed there, beside her, letting the silence settle again, heavier this time. In that stillness, something passed between them. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. Recognition. In the morning, she stood at the stove, stirring porridge with the same hands that had once been shackled in a cellar. Her sleeves were rolled high. Her eyes, though tired, held focus. He limped to the table and sat. She brought him the bowl without a word. "Thank you," he said. She nodded. That afternoon, they worked together fixing the east fence. The wind bit cold, and her hands turned red from the wire, but she didn't complain. She asked questions. About knots. About cattle. About how to tell when a storm's coming before you see it. He answered her carefully, with patience. And the more he spoke, the more something inside him began to soften. A part of him he thought had gone numb years ago when he found his sister's body, burned beyond recognition, still clutching the locket that matched his own. He told Annabeth about her mother one evening as the fire cracked and the kettle steamed. "She braided my hair every Sunday," she said softly. He smiled, a rare thing. "She always braided too tight. That's how I liked it. I didn't want the other girls pulling it loose." A beat. Then she asked, what happened that day? He looked into the fire for a long time. They came from the east. Deserters, starving and drunk. Your ma fought like hell. I found her near the door. Rifle in her arms. 3 dead men at her feet. But you were gone. Annabeth said nothing. Later that night, she wept. Quietly, into her pillow. He didn't interrupt. Healing, he realized, didn't come like lightning. It came like winter ending, slow, unsure, unnoticed until one day the thaw was real. But not all wounds healed the same. One morning, a rider appeared on the horizon. Abram spotted the silhouette through his scope before the dust even settled. A tall man. Wore black. Rode with the confidence of someone who expected doors to open. Annabeth saw him too. Her face drained of color. He's one of them, she said. Are you sure? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The rider reached the front gate by sundown. He dismounted slow. Knocked once on the ranch door. Abram answered with his rifle cradled but not aimed. McAllister, the man said, smiling. Word in town is you picked up a girl. Pale thing. Green eyes. Don't know what you're talking about. The man's eyes shifted, casual, cold. She's worth money. Took a lot of trouble to train her right. You branding livestock now? I'm collecting property. Abram stepped forward. You take another step, I'll bury you 6 feet down. The man chuckled. Mister, you can barely walk. Doesn't mean I can't shoot. The man took the hint. Backed up slow, but his smile lingered. This ain't over, he called. Abram didn't reply. He bolted the door behind him. Annabeth stood by the fireplace, hands balled into fists. Her body shook, but not from fear. From fury. You should have let me shoot him, she said through clenched teeth. I would've. But not yet. She looked at him. You knew he'd come? I hoped he wouldn't. But I knew the past never dies easy. She stared into the fire. Then let's bury it. The next day, they saddled 2 horses. She carried a rifle slung over her back, hands steady, eyes sharp. Abram watched her from the barn door, leaning on his cane. You ready for this? She met his gaze. I was ready the day they took me. They rode out as snow began to fall again, thin flurries swirling in the wind. The plains stretched before them, vast, cold, and unforgiving. But this time, they weren't riding alone. This time, she wasn't a number or a slave or a girl with a sack on her head. She was Annabeth McAllister. And someone was going to remember that name before the end. The trail led them to the outlaws' camp tucked deep into the pines east of the ridgeline, hidden from the eyes of honest men. Smoke curled through bare branches, thin and ghostly. Abram and Annabeth crouched on a cold ridge, watching shadows move between tents and broken wagons, counting figures. 7 men. 1 woman's scream, cut short. The sound turned Annabeth's breath to stone. This ends tonight, she whispered. Abram looked at her. The wind tangled her hair, eyes narrow with fury and purpose. She held his old revolver in both hands like she'd been born with it. He remembered when he'd first seen her, sack over her head, body trembling, shoulders hunched like prey. That girl was gone. He nodded. We flank at dusk. They moved like ghosts. Abram took the north tree line, cutting through snow-crusted brush. Annabeth circled low along the dry creek, boots silent against frozen mud. When she reached the camp perimeter, she paused. A rusted cage sat half-covered in canvas, and inside, a girl no older than 10 clutched at the bars. Annabeth's chest tightened. The child's eyes locked with hers. No words passed, but something ancient and desperate did. She slipped the latch loose, whispering, "Run west. Follow the fence line till you see a red barn." The girl blinked. "Go." She vanished into the trees like a deer released from snare. A guard turned at the wrong moment, caught the flicker of movement. "Hey!" His voice stopped with the crack of Abram's rifle. The bullet tore through his chest. Chaos exploded in the camp. Men scrambled for guns, shouting. 2 fell before they reached them. Annabeth's aim was clean, cold, efficient. Abram limped forward through brush, loading fast, heart pounding. His leg screamed with every step, but he didn't stop. Not now. 1 outlaw charged with a hatchet. Abram fired, missed, then caught him square in the gut with his boot and dropped him with a second shot. Pain roared up his side. He staggered but stayed upright. Behind him, a scream, "Annabeth." He spun. The man in black had her by the wrist, dragging her toward the wagon. His knife was out. "Thought I lost you, 3, he hissed. But you always were the stubborn one." She fought hard, but he was bigger, meaner. Years of rage lit her veins, but still he forced her down. He pressed the blade to her neck. "You're not property," she growled. "Not anymore." He leaned in. "You're mine, just like the rest. No man's gonna change that." Then the sound of a click. Abram stood behind him, rifle to his back. "You're wrong." The outlaw turned too fast. The rifle fired. Blood sprayed. He dropped, face first, beside the wagon. Annabeth didn't move for a second. Then slowly, she got up. Shaking. Silent. Abram reached out. But she didn't take his hand. She walked past him to the body. Looked down at the man who haunted her nightmares. She knelt beside him, lifted the knife he'd held to her throat, and drove it into the dirt beside his head. A mark. A farewell. Not forgiveness. They burned the camp by nightfall. The others had fled, scattered like rats in daylight. Abram watched the flames rise, his leg throbbing. Annabeth stood beside him, arms crossed, lips tight. Her silence was different now, no longer heavy with fear, but with choice. On the ride home, they said little. The child had been found by a ranch hand and fed, safe in the loft. When Annabeth saw her again, she knelt and offered the girl her necklace, a small trinket made from deer bone and thread, carved with a sunrise. "For when it gets dark," she said. The girl nodded, clutching it like it was gold. Snow fell again the next morning. Abram sat on the porch, wrapping his leg. Annabeth brought him coffee. Their eyes met, and for once, no pain passed between them, only something still, and quiet, and rooted. He cleared his throat. "You ever think of leaving?" She looked out toward the horizon. "I used to dream of running. Now I dream of planting." He smiled at that. A rare, fragile smile. The wind picked up. She pulled her shawl tighter and walked out to the pasture, to the spot where the wildflowers had started pushing through snow. She stood there a long time, hands in her pockets. Abram watched her from the porch. Watched her take up space in the world again. Watched her stand straight without fear or apology. She turned back toward the house, and paused. There, at the edge of the yard, a stranger approached. A lawman by the look. Dust-covered. Tall. Stern. "Miss McAllister?" he asked. She nodded. "We found records in the Black Hollow camp. Names. Ledgers. Sales. You're owed restitution." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to Abram, then to the child playing with a stick horse by the barn. "Keep it," she said finally. "You sure?" "I don't want money. I want land. A place." The man nodded, touched his hat, and left. That evening, she knelt in the pasture. Dug into the frozen soil with her bare hands. Abram limped out with a tin box. Inside, wildflower seeds. Saved from the season before. Together, they planted. Knees in the dirt. Cold in their bones. But fire in their chests. And as dusk bled across the plains, the last of the past faded with it. Not erased. But rooted. Named. Claimed. Not number 3. Annabeth McAllister. She was not forgotten. She was home.